All right, man, it's on you now. You got to buy those tickets. You got to make your wife, make your fiance, make your significant other happy. The Blonde Robin is pretty cool, I have to tell you. It's my wife's favorite place. She loves it, and they have really good coffee, so I like it. And it's going to be a fun day. We're going to be able to get coffee and shop. They have clothing there that you can buy that I'm told is super hipster. And then they have house decorations there that are really cool. And then at 2 o'clock, we will eat lunch together. And then we have guest speakers who are coming to talk about marriage and talk about relationships and just kind of pour into all of us who are there. And so it's going to be a super fun day. And we've never done this. This is the first time that we've ever tried a Valentine's banquet or lunch or whatever it is you want to call it, event. We've never done this, so I'm really looking forward to this. And what better place than there. Hey, so listen, I had about 5 minutes of air in my lungs, and I used all 5 during that last song, so we're done. Let's go home. No, that song was amazing. It was great. I loved it. It was a beautiful song. I'm going to do my best to just kind of breathe through this whole sermon. If you don't know, I had COVID a couple weeks ago. I got it right after Christmas, and so yeah, it was a fun New Year's Eve for me and about half of our church. And then the other half of our church texted me yesterday and today saying that they have it. And so we're doing everything we can to just try to get safe and be safe and get through this. Hopefully you received this book when you came in. It is a 30-day prayer guide for this sermon series, and inside of it, there is a card that says, "Who's your one?" You're going to want that card, and you're going to hopefully take advantage of that card, and then the bulletin is in there as well. I will tell you up front, the idea of this sermon series is we want to get everyone in our church to take a step towards bringing someone to Jesus Christ. And over the next 2 years, we're going to be talking about a lot of steps that we're trying to get people who are followers of Jesus to take. And we're going to be talking about the step of getting and becoming a follower of Jesus for those who are not. And our big goal with this sermon series is to help you take a step towards recognizing that there are people around you who need Jesus, and then helping you as you take a step towards talking to them about Jesus. And it will not be as intimidating as you think it will be. I can promise you that. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Do you ever hear a name of a group of people and have a mental picture in your head of what those people look like? Like instantly you know if I were to say something like, "Oh, this is what those people look like." So I got a couple of them here for you today that we're going to do. We'll play a game this year. There's one, and when I think of CrossFitter, I think of maybe Jesse or Jeff or perhaps Rich Froning, who's like the most fit man on earth, second to me. I barely beat him. Maybe it's like that, but maybe your mental picture of a CrossFitter is maybe different. It might be look more like this guy. This was me last week, just lifting casually, a couple hundred, right? Maybe your mental image of a college football fan might look something like this guy here. Right? Like that's the Alabama, keep it classy, prove that you're super classy and throw the Roll Tide on your head and go to a college football game. I have to admit, I was looking at these, and I love these people. Like they are the fun part of games. Like going to games and looking at a guy who is willing to pay like $6,000 and then put toilet paper on his head is fascinating to me. And I love this guy because I can't do this. Like I mentally cannot justify paying money and then putting on something on top of my head. Maybe your idea of a college football fan looks more like this guy, the next guy. Yeah, maybe, like, hey, this is what college football fans look like to you. I'm going to go ahead and wear a green wig, pay a lot of money, and attend a football game, right? This is kind of how I picture most college football fans to look. I mean, they're usually, if you're at a college football game, you're pretty into it. You're not casually going and, oh, what are we doing here? I don't know. Like, you're all in. Maybe if I mention to you the word Star Wars, you have a mental picture of what Star Wars looks like. And for some, I will admit for me, because of my age, this is to me what Star Wars looks like. Mentally, the next picture to me is not what Star Wars looks like. This is a disgrace to Star Wars is what this looks like. Now, maybe it looks like one of the three, right? Perhaps when I mention Star Wars to you, Jar Jar Binks comes into your head immediately. He was the Sith Lord, by the way. He fooled everyone, trust me. Or perhaps, you're at the age like I am where the OG Star Wars happened, or maybe it's the new one, The Force Awakens. I don't know about you. I'm very thankful for The Mandalorian because The Mandalorian made up for The Force Awakens, in my opinion. So, anyways, now, what about the word Christian? If I were to say to you, mentally picture in your head Christian, what does that look like to you? Andy Stanley, who's a pastor in Georgia, said if you ask 10 people to describe a Christian, you will get 10 different definitions. I think for me, the definition of Christian, when I think of this is how I would describe it, is my grandpa and my grandma sitting at the living room table or the dining room table, holding hands and praying before he goes out to take care of the cows and she goes out to take care of the garden. That's like Christian to me. I have one other picture of what Christian is, and it's not nearly as positive. It's an angry person who's really mad and no one knows why, but they just hate everything. Right? That's like the other definition of Christian for me is why are we so mad at everyone right now? Because when I grew up, we'd have guest preachers come to my dad's church, and I would be so confused on why they were screaming about everything. What are we yelling at right now? Maybe your definition of Christian is different than mine, and the odds are really high that the way you think of Christian is just a little bit different than the person beside you and what mentally pops into their head. I'll tell you, Brian and I, we were down, there were some riots, and Brian and I were at the riots trying to pray with people and give Bibles to them, which was an interesting adventure. And one of them said to me, "Why are you here? You're a Christian." And I said, "Yeah, that's why I'm here, because I'm a Christian, and I'm trying to pray with people and try to tell people that Jesus loves them." And they said, "Oh, no, Christians, you guys hate everyone. So why are you here?" Their picture of a Christian was different than mine. And we all have different definitions of what a Christian looks like. But it's ironic that Jesus never one time called his followers Christians. It's ironic that we have all these different opinions and ideas and thought about a word that Jesus never said. Never once did we find Jesus walking up to Peter and saying, "Hey, would you like to be a Christian today?" What did he say to him? He said, "Follow me." Follow me. There's a huge difference between a cultural Christian and someone who follows Jesus. In fact, the Bible only calls Christians 3 times. The first time is in Acts 11:26, where the people at Antioch are making fun of Christians, and they say, "Oh, you are like little Christs." And they begin to mock them, and the early church was like, "Well, our goal is to be like little Christ, and so we'll take the name and we'll run with it." But there's only 3 times in the Bible that the word Christian is used. And ironically enough, disciple is used 281 times. So the Bible references Christians, as we would call them, as disciples of Jesus, people who follow Jesus. And the early church did not call themselves Christians either. They called themselves people of the way. And the way is Jesus, the way, the truth, the life. So when early Christians would meet together, they would say, "Are you of the way?" And the reason they would ask that is because if people were like, "What way?" they knew they weren't a Christian. But if they were, they could gather together. And so instead of saying, "Hey, are you a Christian?" they said, "Are you of the way?" so that they could figure out who was trying to persecute them or not. Because a disciple or a follower of Jesus is significantly different, and it brings huge power to the words that Jesus said in Matthew when he said, "Follow me." Now, I have to tell you, I am a history nerd. I thoroughly enjoy this part that I'm about to talk to you about. This is my favorite part of the sermon. I'm super excited to talk about this part, okay? But I'm a history nerd. And so if you're a history nerd as well, right now you're going to like, "Oh, this is great." But if not, just hang in there for a minute and just kind of, okay, get through this with me and understand that it has a lot of meaning. But when Jesus went to his disciples in Matthew and he said, "Follow me," he was acting something out that was very important. This was not just some mythical, he just had a certain way about saying words. What he was doing was something that took place in that culture and in that time, and it had huge significance. So the time that Jesus was alive, every Hebrew boy at age 5 went to school to study the Torah. Every boy. When you turned 5, you went to school and you studied the Torah from age 5 until age 10. And the very first time that most of them ever heard the Torah being read, the beginning of the Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible, they were given a spoonful of honey. And when they would get the honey, they would taste something sweet while the rabbi opened the Torah and began to read the scriptures. For many of them who were very poor, this was the first time they tasted something sweet in their life, and mentally they put sweetness with the scriptures together. So from age 5 to age 10, they began to study the scriptures, and they began to really unpack the scriptures, and they had rabbis who would begin to teach them. But at age 10, 80% of them were told, "You're not good enough, you got to leave." So only 20% at age 10 were allowed to stay to study the scriptures. That 20% was allowed to study the scriptures. They were allowed to eat all the good food in the temple. They were allowed to have a great time. And everybody wanted to become somebody who was a study under a rabbi. If you were the 80% who got told you had to go home, you then had to study under your father, just like these men who Jesus called. And it wasn't an option. That's what you were doing. You were going to go and apprentice under your dad. At age 17, you passed the school, and then you got to pick your rabbi. And the way you picked a rabbi was you walked up to a rabbi who you respected, and you sat down at his feet. And you just sat there, and eventually he might say, "Follow me," or he might not. Usually they would ask a series of questions that were very difficult, and they were very complicated. There was riddles involved, and eventually out of everyone who sat at their rabbi's feet, the rabbi would point to one of them, and he would say, "You follow me." That person, from that moment on, it was their entire livelihood and job to follow their rabbi everywhere he went and do everything he did. Disciples of rabbis at this time spoke like their rabbi spoke. They talked in the ways that he talked. They taught in the way that he taught. They followed him and literally lived with him and went everywhere that this rabbi went. So much so that the greatest compliment you could give a disciple of a rabbi at this time was to say, I see the dust of your rabbi all over you. Admittedly, for us, that sounds like you just need to take a shower. Right? Like for us, that's like, yeah, that's not a compliment. But what that meant to them was when the rabbi picked his foot up and dust went in the air, you put your foot down because you were so close to him and that dust landed on you, and you were literally exactly like your rabbi. Then, maybe you might become a rabbi, and when you become a rabbi, you then try to find and sit at the feet of another rabbi who is few and far between. It is a rabbi who has my favorite word, and we're all going to learn a great word, and I love this word. It's shmika. He has shmika. Like, it's just a powerful word. Like, your rabbi, if you have a very special rabbi and you are a rabbi, you follow a guy with shmika. It's such a great word. I love it. What it means is that it is someone who teaches the word with authority. He has authority. Authority is shmika. And in history, there's only like 3 rabbis who have this. But what it means is you, first of all, teach other people who teach the Bible. Second of all, you performed a miracle by healing someone. And thirdly, 2 other people who have authority have recognized that you are a very special teacher with shmika. So now look back at Jesus Christ when he enters this world. Where do we find Jesus Christ at age 12? Jesus is sitting in the temple. Who is he teaching? Teachers. He then, and they reference him as somebody who has authority, which is the word shmika. Then he begins his earthly ministry by healing people in Matthew 4, verse 23. When he heals people, what happens? John the Baptist says, there's a man coming whose shoe I'm not worthy to unlatch. As soon as John says that, God the Father then says, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. So there's the history nerd part. It's my favorite part of the sermon. What that means is that when Jesus walked up to those disciples and said, follow me, he was signifying to them, I am a rabbi with shmika, and you should follow me and become my disciple. It was a huge deal. This is why they were so willing to just immediately leave their dad and follow him. But the people Jesus asked is what makes this very special for us. See, Jesus did not simply choose the best, he chose the willing. He chose the willing. He was willing to use unclean and uneducated fishermen who had failed the Torah school and at age 10 had been told, you got to go learn how to fish like your dad does because you're not going to be allowed to study the scriptures anymore. Jesus picked those people. Those are the ones that he picked to be his disciples. And this is very important because this means that Jesus chooses rich people and poor people. Jesus chooses educated people and uneducated people. Jesus chooses men and he chooses women, which no other rabbi did at this time. Jesus was the only rabbi at this time who went to women and said, follow me. All of the rest of the culture said, only men allowed in Torah school. And Jesus said, hey, if you're willing to follow me, I will accept you as one of my disciples. He completely shattered stereotypes. He completely broke the mold on who was allowed to follow him and be his disciple. And because of that, you and I are allowed to follow him and become his disciples. He picked rich people and poor people. See, here, this is what we do in our culture. We pick one or the other. So when my dad was young, he talks about being bullied because he was poor, because it was bad to be poor when my dad was young. But now if you need a villain for a movie, who do you pick? The old rich guy. Because it's bad to be rich nowadays. Jesus said, I am making the level playing field. If you're rich, you can follow me, and if you're poor, you can follow me. If you're educated, you can follow me, and if you're not educated, you can follow me. All are able to follow him. He completely levels the playing field and allows all of us to be his disciples. But what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? His primary calling as disciples is to follow him. What that means? It means to be with him. Your primary calling as a follower of Jesus Christ is to abide in him. He did not make his disciples answer. He didn't say to these men at the boat, hey, you want to follow me? Answer these 37 questions. What did he say? Follow me. Follow me where? Yeah, come on. Well, where are we going? Yeah, come on. Yeah, but what are we going to do when we get there? Yeah, I know. Follow me. Well, we're walking on water. I know. Follow me. We're walking on water. I know. Come on. Well, we're going to Samaria. Yeah, I know. Follow me. Jesus' calling for you and I is to follow him. It is to go with him everywhere we go. It is to be his disciples. Not just a cultural thing, not just, I held a candle at Christmas, not just all of that. It means to be people who say, I am going wherever my rabbi takes me. So his primary calling is for us to follow him, and his secondary calling is for us to bring other people into relationship with him. So our first goal is to have a relationship with God, and our second goal is to identify those around us who need a relationship with him and bring them along with us. Paul said it like this. He said, be ye followers of me, even as I follow Christ. There's another way of saying it, imitate me while I imitate Christ. Our secondary calling as disciples of Jesus Christ is to identify those around us who need him in their life and to begin a relationship with them. Now that sounds, like I said, very, very intimidating. It sounds scary. Oh, I got to tell people about Jesus. But here's the idea of this sermon series. And here's the idea of this message. What if every one of us identified one person and we decided that we would begin to pray for them individually and corporately as a church? And here's what I mean. What if everybody in our church said, I will identify one person and I will begin to pray for that person each and every day, that person will find Jesus Christ. And then we as a church looked together and gathered all the names of everybody who we're all praying for, and as a church we began to pray for those people. And we began to lift up those people and pray that they would become followers of Christ. So, we have something for you. It is a 30-day prayer guide. In this is a couple cards. There's a card that says, who's your one on it? What we're asking you to do in this sermon series is to identify one person and write their name down. On here we have their phone and their email. You can do that or you don't have to. Okay? I have the time of day that I'm praying for my one. I have my one's name on here, and I have the time of day that I'm praying for that man to accept Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. So every day at 8 a.m., there's a man who works out with me regularly, and I put his name and I pray for him. And what this book that we are giving you does is it walks you through daily how to pray for your one. And all you do is you put their name in there. It can be a family member, can be a friend, can be someone you work out with, can be someone you barely know, but man, for some reason, God just says to you, pray for that person. And you walk through 30 days of praying for them. And at the end of the 30 days, we're going to ask you to invite them here. Because what we're going to do is we're going to take the card that you have with your one, and we as a church staff are going to pray for them. And in our huddles, we're going to pray for all of our ones. And in all of our meetings, we're going to pray for all of our ones. And we're going to pray for them so that they can begin to have their heart opened towards the gospel. We are not going to bug them. I'm not going to call them unless you say to me, call them and witness to them, because I just don't want to. But we are, as a church, are going to pray for our ones, and we're going to ask you to pray for your one. So I'm going to ask you right now to fill this card out. If you can't fill it out right now, fill it out and drop it in the offering bucket when you leave. Hopefully, what we have is a bucket full of names that we can pray for together. And as a church, our job as disciples of Jesus Christ is to draw as close to him as we can possibly draw. And then begin to reach our ones. Imagine what the gospel could do in Westerville if over the next 5 weeks, every one of us reached one person. I mean, think about it. Half of our church has COVID right now. But imagine if our entire church, each and every one of us wrote down one name, and God worked on your one name. And God began to work in that person's life, and he began to move in that person's life. And all we're asking you to do is pray for them and then have one gospel conversation with that person and say, hey, I'm a part of a church. We have a really good time. We have fun. It's great. Would you come to one service with me? Imagine what we can do when we begin to live like Jesus lived. This was his mission. And his mission is our mission. It's good to feed people. It's good to take care of people. It's good to help people. But Jesus' mission, he came to seek and to save that which was lost. So we can accomplish that together as a church simply by identifying one person. I've got my one. And I'm praying for my one every day at 8 a.m. And when we do our huddles, we're going to pray for my one. And my one quite regularly tells me that he wants nothing to do with church or Christianity, and that's why he's my one. And I'm going to pray that God begins to soften his heart and move his heart and change his heart, and that God gives me one opportunity to say to my one, hey, would you come to our church? I know you don't normally like it, but would you come this one time? And we do not have to convert anyone. We don't save anyone. We don't rescue anyone. We don't redeem anyone. Jesus does that. All we have to do is give them the opportunity to say yes or no to Christ. The same opportunity that you had at one point in your life. He works miracles. We don't have to. We just simply have to pray and invite. And then we can watch what he does. So, I'm going to ask you all to stand to your feet right now. I know this is a different sermon, but it's the beginning of a new year. It's the beginning of a new year, and so we're gonna do this. You know, this series is the series that we started the week before we shut down, like two years ago. And I've been praying for people's ones for like 2.5 years now from the previous time. It might take years before your one says yes to Jesus. But who is your one? Who's the one person that you know right now, and I know that person needs Jesus? Who is it? Put their name down. We will pray for them, and we're going to ask you to pray for them. And we'll let God work like only God does. He is a wonder-working God.